Good evening, everyone. My name's Ken McPhail. I have the privilege of being head of Alliance Manchester Business School. It really is an absolute pleasure to welcome you all this evening, both here in the room and the many who are also joining us online. Well, this year, 2025, is a special year for us. You may have noticed from the banners around the school on the way in, we celebrate 60 incredible years of Alliance Manchester Business School. For 6 decades, we've been empowering business leaders. We've been creating academic thinkers and entrepreneurial visionaries. I was sitting next to one of them there just this evening. So we really are excited to be celebrating our 60th anniversary, and to mark the occasion, we are taking our prestigious Vital Topics lecture series on tour. We're going global, visiting 4 of our international centres in Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Dubai. And tonight marks the start of that global Vital Topics International Series here in Manchester. Throughout these events, we do want to showcase the unique opportunities that global network represents, but also we want to tell our story. We think we've got an amazing story to tell as one of the first business schools in the UK. And we've got a collection of amazing strengths being part of this amazing university, which means that we think we do have a legitimate role to play in addressing some of the biggest business and societal challenges that we face. And we'll hear there's probably not one which is bigger than the productivity puzzle that has faced the UK unresolved for decades. I really want to also take a moment to thank Renica, our generous sponsors of our event this evening and our Vital Topics Global Series. As you entered, you will have seen the amazing video highlighting the remarkable developments right here in Manchester. We're just saying some of that skyline has changed so dramatically over the past 10 years since I've been here in Manchester. So in 2025, we'll continue exploring not the past, but the future. We'll be exploring the future of business and management through a whole calendar of inspirational events like this evening. And I would encourage you to look at what's on offer, and please do come and join us for many of the events this year. Well, this week also happens to be National Productivity Week and innovation of the Productivity Institute that is based here in AMBS. So it's the perfect occasion to critically reflect on this topic. So I'm going to invite the director of the Productivity Institute, Professor Bart van Ark, to introduce this evening's speakers and the remainder of the event. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have an enjoyable evening.
Well, thanks very much, Ken. And also on behalf of the Productivity Institute, welcome to this first Vital Topics Global. And what a good thinking of the event team to here at AMBS to combine the launch of this series with our National Productivity Week, which is a big campaign across the UK on productivity throughout this week. Because productivity is vital and productivity is global. Productivity is vital because we don't hear economic policymakers talk about much else than about the need for productivity, that we can only get the growth engine in the UK going if we increase productivity again. Yesterday, I was at an event where somebody said, well, why do we have a National Productivity Week? We should have a National Productivity Year. Now, I think our team here at the Productivity Institute wouldn't be too happy with that suggestion. However, we did have a productivity year, but that was in 1963, and that was 60 years ago. And since then, we have seen some things slowing down. So it's vital and very important. productivity is also global. You know, even though we call this National Productivity Week this week because we have so many events across the UK, we're not on our own. We see slow growth in productivity pretty much across the OECD countries. In fact, tomorrow morning, I'm off to Brussels to talk to national productivity boards across Europe to share experiences and ways that we can try to tackle this problem. But there's not much reason to take a lot of comfort from that because there is really a lot for us to think about. And really perhaps even more to think about if this is happening everywhere. So how can it be that in these times of rapid innovation, of a lot of technological change, so many things going on around us, we still do not see productivity growth accelerating? Are we back in this sort of old time of the productivity paradox? Maybe we just have to wait a little and it will come. Maybe there are some firms and some sectors that are doing very well, but others are not. Or maybe there are some regions that are doing very well and others are not. So those are the things that we need to talk about tonight. And therefore, we didn't have to think too long to think about who we should invite to actually talk about it. And that is Professor Dan Brezhnitz, who is the Munk Chair of Innovation Studies and the co-director of the Innovation Policy Lab, and a professor of Global Affairs and Political Science in the Munk School and the Department of Political Science of the University of Toronto, coming over from Canada, where he said it was a bit colder than here. Here it may be a little bit wetter. So there are pluses and minuses to all of this, but we really appreciate it that you've been coming over here to join us here for this lecture tonight. Dan has written numerous books and articles on innovation, the latest which we will talk about tonight, titled Innovation in Real Places, in which he offers, and I quote his own website, pragmatic advice while debunking dangerous myths on innovation, growth, and prosperity is important. Now, that's what we need in National Productivity Week. We need a couple of myths being debunked. And I think it's also a really good, perfect kickoff for the Vital Topics Global. So for the next 20 minutes, Dan will speak about some of the insights on his book that he will talk about. And I think that will give a lot of food for thought. I noticed several people here in the room know Dan's book. Dan is not new to many of us here. Therefore, it's quite important that after those 20 minutes, we have a panel with some key people, Peter Evans, Julia Sutcliffe, and Elvira Uyara, who I will introduce in a little bit more detail after Dan's speech. But for the first 20 minutes, let's listen to Dan Brezhnitz. Welcome to Atlantis Manchester Business School and joining us for National Productivity Week. And this you need.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'll first take a glass of water. What do I need to do to make the, just press? Ah, it worked. See, sometimes innovation actually works. So Bart asked me to basically summarize not only my book, but experience in policy making, some of it very painful, in 20 minutes. So I'm going to be very fast. The thing I should tell all of you is that I wrote this particular book because I became hungry. I became hungry and frustrated in the way we talk about innovation, growth, and productivity, and decided to channel my anger into this book. So I think that the first and most important things when we talk about innovation, innovation policy, prosperity, and growth is actually to remind ourselves what is innovation and why should we care about it? Well, innovation, and I think that's the most important thing, is not invention. It's not just the act of creating. So if invention is the act of coming up with a new idea, innovation is the act of taking ideas and making them into reality. And unlike what we have been told too many times, the most important parts of making them into reality does not need to happen when you make them into reality in the first case or the first time in the world. It's actually the continuance and constant innovation that really help productivity and actually influence welfare. So an example, because we are also on Zoom, is Zoom. If you think for a moment about the ideas of teleconferencing, it's about 100, maybe 120 years old. Even 15 years ago, I remember being invited to those things. And we would do everything in our power to not have teleconferencing because the equipment will be unbelievably expensive. I remember Cisco offering a room for 1.5 million in both sides, and God only knows how much the data communication worked, and the final product was awful. And yet, when COVID happened, we all opened Zoom, Teams, whatever. They worked, they allow us to work. And even more importantly, we think about productivity and the well-being of people, especially the people that don't have $1.5 million. You didn't even have to think about the price. You just open it. Teleconferencing became a utility. It only took us about 120 years to make it happen, but that's when it really influenced humanity, not when somebody came with the idea, oh, we need teleconferencing. It's also important to remember that if we talk about innovation, and I'm saying it as an academic, somebody who was also in a startup, and somebody who did policy, as an academic, we are really nice. As policymakers, we're even nicer maybe, but the people who actually do innovation in the economy are either individuals or companies. We prefer to call the individuals now entrepreneurs, but it is individuals and companies. We, the university and policymaker, can facilitate their work, but we are not going to do innovation in the economy. Innovation-based growth and innovation is the most important thing, and probably for countries like the UK, who Bart just told us last time had a good productivity year in 66? 63, sorry, I missed 3 years. Because it's the only way, especially for advanced economies, where you can actually increase productivity and welfare. So if we don't innovate, we will not have long-term prosperity, especially in already rich countries. And because that, trillions of dollars have been spent, are being spent every year, basically in trying to imitate Silicon Valley. And I have been in at least a different 100 cities that had Silicon hyphen in the name, or at least claim that they'll be the Silicon Valley of the North, the Silicon Valley of the Interior, the Silicon whatever. And it usually doesn't work. I mean, we can think about maybe 2 places outside the US that actually really look like Silicon Valley. Even more importantly, if you think about prosperity and overall productivity, the Silicon Valley model leads in all the places that it actually happened to massive inequality. So a question is, why do you want it, and whether there are other models? And I argue that there are other models, but in order to understand them, we also have to understand how the global economy actually works and some of its big changes. Thankfully, COVID made it clear to anyone that we actually do care about that. And what happened really starting in the 80s, that the way we produce stuff and services have changed. We no longer have completely vertical industries, but what we have is specialization of specific region in specific industries, but also in specific stages in that industry. So case is the semiconductor industry that I've done a lot of work in and is now constantly in the news. If you look at places like Tel Aviv, Silicon Valley, Seoul, Taipei, Hsinchu, China, Japan, you will see that they all have really successful semiconductors industries. You would look at the name of the big companies, and they'll be very similar. So you might think it's the same industry. And yet, when you look at what they do in each of those places, it's as different as can be. So Tel Aviv and Silicon Valley, it's coming up with new ideas to put on silicon. As the whole world now know, there's 1.5 companies, both happen to be Taiwanese, that actually know how to put them on silicon. Everything with a screen that you buy, the second highest profit margin, no matter what the brand is, are going to a Korean company because they control specific niches. And none of it would have happened without the massive innovation that you need to have working with constantly changing materials, tens of thousands of components to create something that only 10 years ago was a simple computer and now put in my pocket in a price that everybody can afford, and moving from to millions of units and then back to a few hundreds, basically within weeks. Even more importantly, each of those places have very, very different distribution of the fruits of success, both in terms of capital and profits, but also who do you employ? Who is allowed to be part of those successful sectors and in what jobs? What kind of skills and what kind of people, and how wide shared is that prosperity? So this sounds very abstract. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes, we can talk more about each specific case later, is just run you through few cases. So first is Tel Aviv as a case of basically a silicon hyphen. When I'm talking about the good, the bad, and the plainly sad, I'm not talking about horrific events in the last 2 years, but on innovation. So first, let's talk about the miracle. In 68, and 68 is an important year in Israel innovation policy, because it's the first time in which the state even thought about innovation and productivity. They actually have no words, so they called it science-based. As an academic, I'm very proud of that. But in 68, in the whole sector, civilian sector, they had 886 R&D working with any kind of academic education. I stood in a room teaching introduction to something in places where there were more than 800 students. And I'm sure that you have some of those rooms in the University of Manchester. This is not a spelling mistake. This is actually inflation. You could see it in the name of a currency. So Israel was a colony of the UK. So the first currency was called the lira, or the Israeli pound. It was changed to shekel. And then within less than 5 years, had to be changed again, but they ran out of ideas. So very innovatively, they now call it the new Israeli shekel. All of it in less than 10 years. And yet, from nothing to by 2000, 71% of industrial export and 70% of GDP growth, speaking about productivity, all came just from startups. Forget the whole IT industry. And since 2000, the largest number of high-tech firms on NASDAQ after the US and China. And as Canadian, it's very sad for me to say that, because when I started working, I could say US and Canada. Canada is not even in the game anymore. And the highest R&D intensity in the world, it's probably a mistake. It's probably now above 5%. But there's a very dark side to this kind of success. In 68, Israel was poor but very egalitarian. Right now, it's one of the most unequal society in the world. To put it in terms we all understand, 1 of every 5 families doesn't have enough money to buy food at the end of the month. So for 20% of Israeli population, this massive miracle means that they're now so poor that they don't have enough food. Just to put it in perspective. And the reason is because it's what they call themselves. They are a startup nation indeed. There's nothing else. And it's basically Silicon Valley on steroids, because all the money also come up from Silicon Valley, the VC. So when you have success and somebody sells their company for billions of dollars, most of those billions immediately move back to New York. They don't even stay in the country. And yet, everybody wants to learn that miracle, and not clear to me why. So to show that there's a different model and that innovation is not only high tech, we're moving to one of the oldest industries in the world, and that's shoes. And in this case, not just shoes, but the highest end of female gender luxury shoes. So I know Kieran, as my friend, has a collection of them at home, because each one of those start at about 2,000 euros. And, you know, as a professor, he can just own multiple. But no matter what will be the brand, you might think it's Parisian, you might think it's whatever, they all visit a really, really small part of Italy, sort of just about Venice. And the reason is that this place called the Riviera del Brenta transformed itself for that shoe industry to what Taiwan is for semiconductors. If you are a great designer in New York, Milano, and Paris, and you actually want to create a shoe, unlike what they show in reality TV, it doesn't work in 48 hours, because when people buy shoes for 5,000 euros, they might actually want to use them for more than 2 hours. And humans have this pressure thing and sweat and chemical reaction, all that stuff. And that's what Brenta does for you. You bring the design, out come a process of how to get that shoe, which would look high luxury and a certain price at a certain time. And the even more interesting for policymakers and us, unlike other cases, all of this transformation started from the business. So until the 80s, Brenta was actually producing really cheap shoes that you can buy in German supermarkets with no names. And they realized this is a dead end because first Eastern Europe and then China was coming. They realized they have a competitive advantage. They're in Italy. And they went to Milano and Paris and hook up with the high fashion houses and basically figure out what they need and then transformed everything back home. And only then the policymaker joined them. I won't bore you, but you can imagine what kind of really different institutions you need in order to succeed in this. What kind of different connection to the global economy. So for example, in order to make sure they have the new ideas and that the people make decisions know about them, they have a program together with a Pearson School of Design in New York, where the designers that want to know how to do shoe come to Brenta for a year. So the Brenta firms have access to the ideas that will be in the market in 5 years. And when those people actually become designer, who do they call when they want to make shoes? They call the people from Brenta because that's who they know. Different kind, there's no VCs here. Much widespread prosperity. You have people who are 3D designer and software programmers, but you also have people that actually make those wooden shoe models that we all know about. Stage 3, right, is what I called second generation product and component innovation, and that's where Taiwan excelled. We already talked about semiconductors, so I can talk about it after. But as I was told that people in Manchester also know how to use bikes, and I saw those bike lanes. If you think about the massive transformation of bikes, even in just the last 25 years. So when I was a student and I had bicycles, it was a full daily exercise just to pick them up and walk with them to the second floor. Now my bicycles weigh less than my backpack. And the reason is Taiwan. What Taiwan did, using actually exactly the same policy instrument and research institution that they did for semiconductors, is realized a new technology in the US called carbon fiber, which was then only for defense, suck it from the US, outmaneuvering all those export controls, and then diffusing it into a specific industry, in this case, bicycles, who then figure out how to, using those carbon fiber, change a product which is more than the design of a product. Forget how old is a product. The design is 100 years old, right? And change the frames. And now every good frame that you buy are made by either Giant, which is that company, sometimes with a name, sometimes not, or one other company. And even with China and India coming on shore, you have several billions a year industry that actually sits critically. I challenge you to go to a bicycle store, buy high-end or even mid-range bicycle without a Taiwanese frame. You can do it, but it'll be very, very difficult. All of that led to, again, massive prosperity in a city in Taiwan nobody probably here know even exist. You have people who are actually expert, maybe some of the top people in material science, but you also have people that actually get the frames done, and a massive amount of them. And again, you talk about different institutions, you talk about different policies, you talk about different ways in which you attach yourself to the global economy, different finance, and much, much, much wide spread prosperity. Last but not least, because it is where things happen, let's talk about Shenzhen. So right now, people do recognize that Shenzhen is a hub of innovation. But what is interesting about Shenzhen is that not only did not really exist until the 80s, it was what they call a village or town, but they had 2 engineers and no universities. And as a matter of fact, when I started to do research in Shenzhen in 2006, they still didn't have a university. What they have is outpost campuses that they were just starting to build. And when I told my friends in Beijing and Shanghai, I'm going to Shenzhen to study innovation, I was told I'm an idiot. And yet, if you think about almost all the Chinese companies we either fear or respect in the world, from, of course, Huawei to ZTE to BYD to the producer of 85% of the drones to Tencent, they all come from Shenzhen. And they all come and started their ascent because they really know how to innovate in the actual production of the product. And then they build on top of it. And now, of course, they control every sector you might want to think about. And again, I'm not repeating myself, but you're talking about really different innovational capacity when what you want to do is to get a smartphone which is as good as the others, but not necessarily the first, and move a production to 10 millions or 500 million, and then 2 weeks later, when that trend is out, stop the production, move to produce something else. Very different role for policymakers. A very different education system. Very different, of course, financial system. Very different way in which you connect to the world. And yet, very widespread prosperity. So Shenzhen which basically did not exist in the 80s, is now not only one of China's biggest cities, but it's the city with the highest GDP per capita in China. And when you think about that, it means all those internal immigrants anyone who reads about China usually do not have wonderful prospects. And where they become, it's a massive case of a miraculous prosperity and productivity in China. Maybe the most impressive one in a country that's just known to do really impressive stuff in the last 25 years. So, open questions, because Bart, I think, is going to kill me if I keep on talking. No? Okay. So first of all, should we think about what is innovation in our innovation policies if the aim is not just to be the first in the world and feel that we are superior, but if we actually want productivity and growth? Second, how the multifaceted characteristic of innovation and the global economy actually should influence the policies in the UK, again, if the aim is to induce innovation, not for innovation's sake, but to have growing productivity and widespread prosperity in specific places, and not just in London. And also then, how should we think about what choices we have, right? Both as citizens and as policymakers and as business people. What choices do we have? Do we have to always follow the trend? What is it that we want? And maybe what we want should not just be wealth, but should be widespread prosperity. And if it's widespread prosperity, and Bart will immediately say growing productivity, shared productivity, maybe our innovation policies need to have a completely different focus. And by the way, not very popular in most Canadian universities when I said that, but that's beside the point. And here, and then I'll stop, I think it's really important to have vision. So we spent the afternoon thinking about a vision for Manchester in a project which is actually also part, I think, of a productivity institute. And here is where I want to explain what I mean by vision. I'm not talking about a grand vision and a program of 150 pages that explain everything. I'm talking about real pragmatic vision. So in 15 years, how does a successful Manchester look like? What kind of companies? What kind of skills and people those companies are going to employ? What kind of financing they need? What kind of relationship to the rest of their industry and the global industry they need? Not just the thing that I find too much, and I found a lot when I was the chief advisor to the Department of Finance of Canada. When I said, we want innovation, people say, yeah, we need more VC. Okay, why? And the vision we have is, where do we want to be in 15 years? Then we can reverse engineer. And then I, as somebody who's an expert in innovation policy, can tell you how innovation policy can be a tool to reach that vision. The other thing that that vision does, it's allowing you to know whether you are in the right way or not. If your vision is VC per capita, how do you know that you're actually reaching prosperity? If your vision is a transformed Manchester and you have at least an idea how you want to look like in 15 years, when you veer and when your policy just don't do what you want, you immediately see that and can try to experiment again. And I hope that we have, since we have expert in policymakers on our panel, talk about the fact that innovation policy is actually a really difficult thing to do for policymakers, because as policymakers, we are trying to create the agents, like our, may I allow younger gentlemen here, who actually will innovate. But as an innovation or policymakers, I know how to make a train and I can think about fast train. I don't know what will come out of innovation. I can hope that I create the students and then stimulate them to work and giving them the environment. I can try to move it to a specific sector and think about the global industry, but I actually don't know what they will come from, because if I know what they will come from, I should quit my job and become a billionaire. And with that, I just want to thank you all. I really do care about those issues. So this is my real email, and which not everybody has, by the way. You will check on the university website, you'll get the wrong one on purpose. But this is a real email. And if you have any questions after this panel, just feel free to reach out. And thank you for having me here.
Please. Please take a seat. Now, while the panelists take their seat, the most important question for me that comes out of this presentation is the shoe collection of Kieran Flanagan. So I suppose that the next thing is probably an excursion to Kieran's house to figure that out, where
Yes.
real innovation is happening. But let's not go down that road. Great presentation. Thank you so much. And so much, as I said, it is pragmatic. It is debunking a couple of myths. And I wouldn't be able to sort of drill a little bit more in that without a few panelists. So I'm briefly going to introduce on the other end of the group of chairs is Julia Sutcliffe. She's a professor as well, which I'll say in a minute, but her main job is Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department for Business and Trade, where she has been since 2023. and she provides science and engineering advice to department ministers and senior officials, and really champions what is so important, an evidence-based approach to decision-making, something that you indeed have been arguing for very clearly in your talk. She's previously was the chief technologist at BAE Systems, so really comes out of the private sector. And she is a professor, an honorary professor at the University here in Manchester in computer science. Welcome. And next to Julia, we have Peter Evans, already mentioned very briefly as a young entrepreneur. That's great. You know, you take it as a compliment, I think. He is the CEO, though, at Orderly. And Orderly is an e-commerce platform. It specializes in supply chain technology, particularly in sustainable practices for the food and beverages industry. And Peter also has a link to the university because he's a technology strategy advisor to the university's innovation factory. Welcome as well. And then last but not least, of course, we have Elvira Yara. And Elvira is a professor here at AMBS in innovation studies, but also the executive director of the Manchester Institute for Innovation Research. And she teaches and conducts research on science, innovation, policy and management, and regional innovation. So you got everyone you want to talk to, right, on this panel. So let's do it like this. I'm sure that Becky will tell me that you know, we have to finish on time, which we're not going to do, but we'll do our best. So
can you come more often to University of Toronto?
Oh,
I like that.
Okay, well, you'll regret saying that later on, but we'll come back to that. Let's first do a very quick round with our three panelists. Sort of first off the cuff reaction, sort of what did you find challenging here? And then I have a specific question to each of you, and then we of course open up to the room for questions. So think about your questions, challenging, debunking, dealing with myths. That's what we like here. So Julia, let me start with you.
So I think the initial takeaway, and thank you for inviting me here this evening, and for such a brilliant presentation, was that this is so messy and complex. It's not easily predictable. It's a highly integrated system. So portfolios of sort of managed risk is the only way to sort of address this space, creating conditions and then taking risks, because it is simply not predictable. So I thought it was a fantastic presentation. So much to go at. Thank you.
We'll pick up on that a little later, for sure. Peter.
I thought it was really interesting how different areas of the world targeted a different stage of innovation. And I was trying to think, where would my business and where does the UK sit on that area? And I came quickly to the fact that it's nowhere. So, or everywhere at the same time. And is that the best strategy to take? Because you've got this methodology, and yeah, where do we fit? And is that the reason why we're not as productive, efficient as we want to be?
Apart from the fascinating shoe conundrum that we have now about Kieran's collection, I want to thank Dan for making two clear points. I encourage my students to attend this lecture. I hope they're following here or online, because we tell them about this. A point of departure is the obsession with Silicon Valley in the first session, and the problems of replication is possible. Why is maybe not a good model, and maybe there are alternatives particularly for regions that are lagging behind. And I have a collection I have a list which I think is like 50 silicon hyphens. It increases every year, and we should probably be looking at other places. And I'm really grateful for the book because it gives lots of examples, really good cases, different examples that Manchester can learn a lot from, for instance. And I'm also very grateful for making the point, which is kind of obvious for us in innovation studies, but it needs to be repeated constantly. Innovation is not invention. And innovation is much more than technological innovation, and it's much more than R&D. And I think in the UK, we tend to default to this kind of R&D linear model of innovation when we talk about policy, thinking that innovation necessarily comes from R&D and university research. And we need to take, if we want to increase productivity, and we do quite well in R&D, it turns out, according to the statistics, but it's not translated into productivity. And this aspect of diffusion, adoption, different stages, I think is really, really important.
Let me kick in a quick question before I go back to each of the panelists. You call it stages, whereas in a way, it sounds like it's different models. So can you explain a little bit to the audience, what's the difference? Well, we understand what the difference between stages and models, but why do you call it stages, whereas it also means a little bit like it's different models?
So when I first wrote the book, I thought about stages or phases, but decided on stages because the way to think about it, which I thought at least very helpful with my student, is when you have a product or service and you see the end results and you start then to think about how it is made, if you will, how you make the sausage, how you make this. You start to look at activities and you found out that you can actually think about it. I claim 4 pages. Some of my students claim that I should do 3 pages, stages. Some of them claim 5. But you can think about it and actually very helpful because each one of those stages necessitate the most important things as policymakers and business leaders. It's different kind of finance, different kind of institutions, different kind of way you relate to the world, and different kind of critical activities, if you will, that you grieve a global production change that in the end come with a bottle or an iPad. I don't know. Is it that iPad? Yeah.
Okay, but sorry, I can't help myself. It will be my last question.
Good luck.
Yeah, that might be. But it is assuming this, if you have these stages, and there are different places in the world or different places in the country do different things, we assume that there is a globalized world, right? We have globalization and specialization that makes this possible. What if globalization is not there anymore? Then you probably have to go all 4 models if you want to keep yourself going.
So I would challenge your assumption that globalization is not here to stay. That's one. I will even say that even if we have a whatever you want to call it with China, we are not going back to the old Detroit or the old Ford Motor company that control everything from rubber plantation and mines to a one factory and everything would come online. This system is so effective because people can innovate and specialize and get really high productivity because of that in specific stages. What we might have, and as a matter of fact, as somebody who actually care about the planet, thinking about shipping all those products back and forth, have more regional networks, multiple of them. They're also much more resilient because then when you have an earthquake in Japan, not the whole world doesn't have anything for 6 months. But that's actually an opportunity for places like Manchester here or Hamilton in Ontario, because if those networks, global networks, are now stuck and everybody is difficult, when you have actually, because of geopolitics or geoeconomics or whatever you call it, a flex world, this is the time where places can think about how they insert themselves. So you should give answers, not just questions.
Yes, sir. And so the answer is globalization is going to stay. And I'll give Donald Trump a call tonight.
Please, I heard he's very good in taking.
Thanks, Paul. Peter, let's go to you now. And let's take a bit more of a sort of business perspective rather than sort of big picture perspective. You know, you run a business. When you were here this tour and now you think you go back to work tomorrow morning or tonight, what is it that, how does this help? Let's put it that way.
I think I'm going to try and understand where my business sits inside that chain, and we're an aggregator of different bits of the stages you showed earlier. So we're using services that are built on those advanced AI chips. We're using some of the designs that came from the stage 1 from the very start to change. We're trying to. It sounds like a grand vision. We're trying to change the world. So we're trying to reduce food waste completely using artificial intelligence. We believe that if you can understand the demand better through better AI forecasting to understand what's happening everywhere, you can then control the farms and the growing, and you can reduce the carbon from that whole cycle. So I'm going to go and think of this and do less of the things further up the chain. So try not to innovate where innovation's already happened and try and put the pieces together and use the connections globally and the best people we've got in the best places to try and accelerate my vision get our business to where it wants to be. So it's really helped both people.
Are you happy?
Yes.
Any further advice?
How can I buy shares?
No, but I think you are, if you look at these four models, where would you put yourself at the moment? Where would you want to go?
We're probably 4 at the end. So we're taking innovation from other people and trying to carve it into a niche of reducing food waste. So we're not trying to vertically integrate ourselves at all. We're just trying to get the best people to solve the right part of the right challenge in that very, very end stage to essentially change the hearts and minds of people in food and beverage to make better, more sustainable sourcing decisions.
Julia, let's take this to the national level for a moment. There's a lot going on. New government, well, it's already there for a while, but lots of activities in action, industrial strategy, growth plan, lots of thinking around science strategy and things like that. If you hear these 4 phases, I know this is a really big question, but I asked them well ahead of time, so you know what's coming. Do you think that what we currently working on as a government, we recognize that there are these 4 different stages, and we have we're trying to put policy instruments in place that we acknowledge that there are different ways of innovating?
Great question. So yeah, lots going on, definitely. So to answer your question, I guess I'll sort of touch on 2 perspectives. So firstly, from the private sector, as Dan sort of indicated in his speech at the beginning, turning something into a product or a service that you can trade and make profit from, be successful with, is really, really difficult because lots and lots of things need to be in phase when you do that. You need the right technology, as you're saying, you've picked out a technology, now you're applying it. You need skill sets that are available, not just engineers and scientists, but people that can run businesses, people that can access finance, people that can provide finance. You need infrastructure, digital infrastructure, laboratories, you need transport connecting places. You need to access markets, so you need a competitive edge at the right time. You need to be able to navigate the different markets. Your domestic market might not be big enough, so you might need an international outlook. So you need a whole set of things to line up. And if you just have a great idea in one space and it's isolated and those other things are not connected, you won't be able to get it through into that kind of product or service that you can trade and be successful with. So in other words, your innovation won't go end to end if you can't line all those things up. And I think what I would observe is that when those things line up, it's because you've got government and policy and industry and business and academia, so all working together, all pulling the levers that they can pull with a combined vision of where we want to be in 10, 15 years' time. So the industrial strategy that we're developing at the moment, so I had 3,000 responses, the consultation closed just recently, is doing exactly that. It's saying, let's have a 10-year plan with key sectors that we have identified that we think could generate the most growth over the next decade and more. The point is to prioritize, but the point is also to embed those strategies into local plans. So working with local leaders and the combined mayoral authorities, regions, etc., to create 10-year plans for your region is a key part of what we will be doing in the coming months. Thinking about the sort of international outlook, but also that kind of regional and domestic outlook. And I think bringing all that together as a partnership is hopefully creating the conditions in which you can innovate and be successful. But as I think I sort of said in my sort of opening sort of response to you, it's complex. These are hugely integrated systems of chance and opportunity and lining up different factors. So creating the conditions in which an innovation can flourish by lining up the different levers is what we are trying to establish. And I think that then creates the best possible opportunity for innovation to happen. You don't know exactly what the answer is going to be, but at least you can give yourself the best possible chance in the sectors where you can sort of see the most growth. And that's aligned also to national priorities around, decarbonisation, net zero, and defence and resilience, etc. So So a huge amount going on, but it's all about that partnership and common vision.
So then in your research, what are the countries that you think really do this well? Give us one example or two where you say, look, I've looked at countries where I think they really do a good job in recognizing the different ways of innovating, or aren't there any?
So, sure. So the countries I'm mentioning now are not only doing it well, but doing it in a way that actually create widespread prosperity. Okay, not just really successful innovation. So Israel is just out. I actually think we're doing it in that policy, we're maybe the best in the world, but the impact is not something I wish on any other society.
Yeah.
So Silicon Valley in Israel is out. So we already talked about Taiwan. And if we had time, nobody in Taiwan thought that TSMC is going to be a great success. As a matter of fact, not only nobody thought about it, but when they tried to spin it off from a public research institute, which by then you already have UMC and other companies, nobody in the private sector in Taiwan was willing to give money. And if you look at who bought the shares, so it became a private company, it was the investment arm of the political party that then controlled Taiwan, and a small Dutch company called Philips, which, by the way, was very lucky for TSMC because they got all the patents. So nobody could sue them. But that's beside the point. But they had a vision of, where can Taiwan play? Because it's a small country, around it, massive enemies, not a lot of capital, and must for a wide share of prosperity, otherwise the government will be kicked out. So they thought about certain activities in an industry which they thought will be great, and they were lucky. They also had 12 other sectors in which we never heard about Taiwan, and we will never hear about Taiwan. Finland has been doing very well, and it's also a miracle. If you think about other countries in Europe that are very innovative and create shared prosperity for many, many years, Switzerland actually come to mind, and Austria. I'm not sure what will happen now after the election. That's speaking about complexity, but up until now, since World War II.
So Julia, when you try to shape these policies with your colleagues in investments and around the country, to your point, the place which we'll come back to in a second, where do you take your inspiration from?
Well, I suppose part of the answer to that is the consultation itself. So seeking the views of businesses and innovators and entrepreneurs within our community. What are they telling us are the barriers to the growth that they want to achieve? So I think that's back to that sort of partnership position. That's really important. I think as Dan has articulated, each sort of country, each region has got its own specific context at a certain point in time and within a sort of national and then a global and international context, so that it's hard to be formulaic about this. But what we are hearing from businesses of different shapes and sizes as to what are the barriers and what they want government to do in terms of policy and levers is a critical part of what we're developing at the moment.
So Vera, let's now go to the regional level, because that's the place-based level. It's such an important part of your story, and something that we also at the Productivity Institute care enormously about. I've forgotten to take my copy of the regional productivity agenda, but we just put out an agenda across all the regions in the UK, and I'm happy to get you a copy or find it online. But to your question here, because you do a lot of work on the regions, what are the elements that is it possible at a regional level, whatever that is, combined authorities or local authorities, that's sort of the two things we have in town, maybe you have devolved nations, of course. Can you shape policies at that level of government?
Yeah, I think you can, if you take this broad view of innovation. You can. I mean, if you take innovation as not just being technological innovation, but encompassing all these activities and able to deliver wealth. And you have some very good examples in the book, and you mentioned Hamilton in Ontario, where they kind of restructured the health system, and that became a driver for innovation in like medical devices and so on. And so hospitals had a big part to play. It was very demand-led, it was problem-led. And I think that's where the regions have played a huge part. You mentioned demand, importance of demand. So, you know, if we move away from this kind of supply side policies, R&D led, and we take a broader view that links in demand, so and a more realistic view as well, that starts from the strengths of places. So what are the assets, what can we build on? I think that's a place, a way to go. And looking at broader sectors, you know, R&D based activities are a narrow part of the UK economy. We're mainly service led, and there are things like a foundational economy sectors, social care. I'm sure there's plenty of opportunity for innovation in those broader sectors. So to answer your question, yes. And I think so far the UK has not got this act together in terms of regional innovation policy. And there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of activities, but it was kind of short term. It was not properly resourced. And I think with the now devolution agenda and innovation is going to be part of the portfolio for major or combined authorities. There's huge opportunities to combine. Of course, different regions are at different stages. And there's like challenges in terms of multi-level coordination, building capacity, capacity for experimentation that you mentioned. But I think there's huge potential.
I think one of the big challenges, maybe one of you wants to respond to this, and then we go to the room and get some questions, is it requires a lot, not just from national governments, but also from regional governments in terms of capacity and wiring. You say it's complex. You know, we have to select industries and sectors we want to focus on, and then we have to get the skills agenda right and the innovation agenda right and so on. How, you know, and in the UK, even our, you know, Greater Manchester is the one of the authorities with the longest lifetime, but a lot of it is very new. Can they get this done?
So the short answer is yes, but let me add a little bit of complexity to it. So first of all, as somebody who, especially now, just been on the highest national federal level, right, Treasury, finance, I actually have much more respect for regional policymakers, because one of the things they do, and we didn't in the federal, they actually know. They actually know what's happening on the ground, actually know companies, they actually know what works. And if you're stuck in London or Ottawa and you're in a treasury, basically the only thing you can count on is tax. And you have no clue what's happening, especially the northwest of Britain. Who knows? You're in London. So that's one. The question is how you take that knowledge and that accessibility to the entrepreneurs and companies that actually work to do things. Now, the other thing is, yes, it's complex, but we're talking about the real world. If your aim, no matter what level of government, is get everything right and move everything together, you will never, ever reach success, because you will never do that. You need to prioritize and also realize what you can and cannot do. And again, in that fact, I now have much more respect for policymakers or leaders of cities, because one of the things that they have, or they don't have, I should say, is the delusion of power of people in finance, in commerce, that sit and think that they're all powerful and know everything. They know, I'm the mayor of Manchester. Here are a few leverages with policy that I can do. I can maybe control space. I maybe have a little bit of money. I can work with university. I need to make it happen. And on the positive side, if you actually look at all of those cases of success, they didn't get everything right in the beginning. They got just enough that you started to move in the right direction. But because they have a joint vision everybody started to understand that and moving in the right direction. And then they scale it up and stop doing two things that governments constantly do, and that is change all the strategic plans every few years because you have really smart people that come and think they know everything. And also cut down where it doesn't work.
Be willing to fail, as we all know. Which is
Yeah, but really fail, like stop it.
Yeah. All right. I don't want to get back on the wrong side of me, so we have to go to the questions. I take two questions from the room, then we'll take two questions online, and then depending on the length of the answers, we can take a little bit more. Mike, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mike Eberick. I'm a director in a company called Metro Dynamics. We work with places all over the UK on innovation and other things, but I also used to do some economics in this city. I'm really attracted to the broad thesis you put out, but I've got a couple of comments that lead to a question. One is causality. I mean, I don't know much about Israel, but California is, I think, about the richest state in the US. And to the extent that innovation, the riches of innovation don't flow through to the people of California, that's, in my reading of the US data, more to do with policy choices about personal taxation, corporate taxation, and not to do with the model of innovation itself. So there must be a question as to whether the model of innovation that you put up as a straw man really drives the inequalities that you pointed to. Is it a causal relationship? However, I totally get your argument that productive economies like Taiwan and the bit of Italy you highlighted have features that are more equal because they include manufacturing as well as financially driven innovation. But I've done work for OECD in Friuli, Venezia Giulia, in Italy, and a bit in the Veneto, and I'm pretty sure that the shoe industry of the Riviera della Brenta is pretty small beer in the terms of that bit of the economy. Much bigger are things like furniture making, where most furniture, office furniture in Europe gets made in that bit of Italy, and actually still Electrolux and companies like that. So again, I'm not sure how much that's really telling us about what's driving productivity in that regional economy. And both of those comments lead me to the question. For good or for ill, we have surrendered most of our productive capacity in this country over the last 40 years through laissez-faire governments of a kind, using a very US model. And we've made a very good job of taking apart our state too. So I want to go back to the question Bart asked you, because I really want to know, for the sake of our city, for the sake of the places we work in, how operable really is your model of Taiwan or the Riviera della Brenta in an economy like ours, where we consistently vote for small state, low tax, very liberal type economies, when the models you described seem to me to obtain in economies like the Nordics you pointed to that are high tax, high social value, and with much more manufacturing and government than we seem to have here.
Then can you hold the question for a second? I take a second question from the room, if there is one. And otherwise, we'll let you answer the question, then we'll go to online. No second question from the room, so take this one. Oh, sorry, did I miss somebody? Yes, please. Oh, sorry, yeah. Yep, there you are.
My name is Manoj Ranavira. So yesterday we had DeepSeek coming out, which suddenly changed the landscape of AI, which told us prior to that, you need to raise immense amount of capital if you want to compete with the big companies. Suddenly that changed overnight. We talked about innovation earlier, and how do you see this evolving? I think that AI is developing at such a fast rate. Nobody can actually predict the future. But you also raised the point about Manchester in 10 years' time. I wonder whether there's any views from the panel on the topic.
Two very different questions. Then you want to first have a go, and then if any of the panelists, and then we'll take two questions online.
Sure. So I'll take the first question. And I want to thank you because actually furniture in the Veneto is the other case in the book in that chapter. So I highly recommend you buy a copy of the chapter.
What here?
But I use those cases because you can get to see how things are done, even, and I fully agree, in a really small place with back then not a lot of resources. So most people don't know, but the Veneto was not rich. As a matter of fact, it was one of the poorest, and it was so cold and so poor that people sent their kids with grappa drink in the morning just to keep them warm. So you can imagine how great students they were in elementary school when they were completely drunk on grappa. That bad. On the US, I agree with some of the things you said. But if you look at the US and even Silicon Valley just 20, 30 years ago, it had a lot more of this diffusion of activities, because when Apple and HP came with a new product, they didn't do it in Silicon Valley, but they did it very close by, okay? And they still have that kind of people that actually know how to innovate. So you had that within the country, which, by the way, go back to your question. And then a set of decisions was made. And I fully agree. If I'm now back in the US, where I taught for many years, and I want to make money, the last thing I will do is try to have any business model that needs massive capital investment in capital, because I'll be killed by my own investors. And you need to change that for the US. I don't know how bad it is in the UK. But I think to the other side of your question, and I can talk about Canada. I basically volunteered 1.5 years of my time to try to make our national government better after COVID and think about innovation policies. Maybe the new government, which is soon coming, will change things. I don't think so. I think we have a system very similar to what you just described, which has zero ability to think strategically and even less, maybe negative ability to then implement it. But they still have high hopes for Canada. And the reason is, I think finally, after about 40 years of constant slow decline, different places understand that Ottawa or London are not going to save them, and they get the act together. Now, not all of them will succeed. Actually, probably most of them will not. But if there's enough successful cases all across the UK, hopefully others can follow. I have no clue how to change a federal government or the UK government. I think it's a lost cause. I hope not, but I think it's a lost cause. In terms of innovation, I'll let other people. I think I talked a lot. I'll let other people first.
Peter, on the question, I mean, I'm sure that you haven't jumped on DeepSeek this morning. Well, maybe you have. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, and you answered that question.
So I think it's a good case study of how bureaucracy and loading businesses that don't need it with capital is destined to fail. And I think that's probably what's going to be wrong with innovation in our country and our side of the world going forwards. And I hope DeepSeek is a wake-up call to the people who are plowing capital into the pockets of people and not actually into ideas that's coming out. We've scaled so far with no investment. We like to believe we displace the big players who are completely full of capital, nowhere to the level that DeepSeek have done, but we will look, if we want to use DeepSeek, it looks more efficient for us. But if people don't take DeepSeek as a wake-up call, and that goes to the wider industry, this displacement will happen through innovation. It's going to be a tough time for this economy, especially.
I'll add one thing.
Sure.
It's interesting for me as a political economist and not just an economist, that the myth until DeepSeek was that you need massive capital and massive propriety of data, which mysteriously was exactly the things that only the big players had, who then convinced everybody else that this is a game, and not only got the investment, but also discourage everybody to compete with them.
We go to 2 questions online, and then
the first question is about the UK. With each authority defining their own approach to place-based economic growth and inward investment, isn't there a risk that it will be done badly with a cottage industry approach? And then second question is to you, Dan. And in the case of Israel, maybe it's the 2 economies problem, that the traditional industries do not adopt enough technology to grow or improve productivity, and the high tech is a silo. So how do we connect the innovation makers and the takers to improve welfare for all?
So the first question, Elvira, Julia, any of you want to pick that one up?
The
I'll come in after you if you want.
Sure.
Okay. On the, yes, well, this happened before, we know, and I've studied like regeneration strategies and clusters, and basically regions copying each other, and what was the fashionable thing of the day, it's the next region will do that. So in Raquel sitting here, and I've done some work on the idea of smart specialization that is very popular in Europe, and basically thinking about your strengths, where you do well, and move from there, not further specialized, but find niches that you can diversify into and create value. So that will be, and that requires good data, right? And that requires capacity for experimentation and learning and so on. And it takes time. And I think you say that very well, that innovation policy never ends. You know, it's a continuous process of empowering actors and giving them capacity and improving the ecosystem. And the other point was on, I can't remember, so I'm going to let you.
Julia, you want to take the follow-up on Elvira?
I was simply going to comment that to your point, the regional agenda is super important. The regions each have strengths, whether it be a sort of a cluster or a kind of a high opportunity big industrial complex, or genuinely a sort of combined mayoral authority type of region. Well, they each have their strengths, and their strengths are known locally. So I think that's a really important part of the industrial strategy, those growth plans, that vision that is absolutely anchored in the place. However, making sure that we've got the capabilities to enable what those visions could be is really important. And some of those things are common across the sort of nation, and others will be very specific for the place and the vision that they have, building on the strengths that are there. So I think it's, yeah.
But I think indeed that point of understanding where your strengths are, you know, and again, I mean, you know, Greater Manchester Authority has had a long time to think about this, and I think they've got a pretty clear view of where they want to go. But a lot of combined authorities are very new, and just beginning to figure out what actually the dynamics of their region is. So that's I think a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, and it's knowing your assets and knowing what you well, but also I think another point that is very important and connects to some of the tensions that were mentioned earlier, Silicon Valley and so on. You have a choice. And you can, in creating this vision, it can be kind of an inclusive innovation vision. And I know Dan's written about this idea of distribution sensitivity. I really like that paper. And when you like say, okay, innovation policy can lead to regional disparities, social disparities, but you have a choice to do things differently. So it's not inevitable that innovation policy and growth will lead to inequality. So I think that's an important point to make.
Dan, can you take the second question?
Sure.
And maybe any final comment you want to make as we're going to wrap it up?
So first, I'll just say something about the first. And I actually, it might come as a shock, but I'm a political and an economist. I actually do believe in competition.
Oh dear.
So regions that actually are allowed to try their own versions and their own visions, and they actually compete as to who is which one is most successful, and actually then create few models of success, not only make the whole country much more dynamic, but if you think about it as a portfolio of activities and industries, make it much more resilient when the global economy, just like happened in AI, is changing. And by the way, China has done it perfectly, not because they were smart, actually just because of political constraint after they decided to open up. In terms of the dual economy, yes, it's horrible. As a matter of fact, I'm now part of, speaking about food, of a project in Central Valley. I don't know how many of you heard about even Central Valley, but it's the region in California, which is actually considered critical to the security of all of North America, because it's the by far biggest agriculture producer in all of North America. It is filled with highly educated people that also are doing everything you might want them to do with new technologies. There's only one big problem. the average and the median wage there, about 45 minutes away from Silicon Valley, are as low as the Appalachian. So you go from Silicon Valley to level of poverty and distress in a region which actually looks to be successful, that equals some of the worst places in the world, not just in the US. Diseases, illness, drugs, people dying. Not only that, you look on climate change and you look at where you have the worst impacts of climate change. It's on those poor people who are critical for the rest of North America actually getting food. 45 minutes away. We're hoping to be able to do something about it. We are hoping to offer them hope. But it's, as I said, it's not because of lack of skills. It's not lack of knowledge. It's not lack of technology. It's figuring out how to create business models that actually create local prosperity in the food industry. And how to move from the food industry to biofuels, to complete recyclable. They actually don't like the circular economy now. They call it the bioeconomy, because it's supposed to be above circular. I hope that they're successful. I'm trying to help them. Whether they can win versus what makes Wall Street very, very, very rich.
I was trying to think how to send the people home in a somewhat positive spirit. But you just did it at the end, which is that we need a lot more Peters.
Yes.
Right? Because you're describing Peter's business model here, right? I mean, in the way that you're talking about it. So, and if we have a lot more Peters in Central Valley, that would help. Now, to be serious, I mean, what you're basically saying, this has to be a bottom-up process in which people and business leaders get opportunities, in which regional policymakers begin to discover where the strengths are to really begin to bank on and build an agenda that then can meet the national policy priorities in order to have a vision that we're talking about. We need to leave it at this. I'm sure there are more questions. You said you're still walking around here, so if you come downstairs, who knows? You can do this. If you haven't got enough of productivity, there are another 15 events this week everywhere in the UK. Go to productivityweek.co.uk, and there you can find more events, or you can just go online and see a lot of very good content. Thanks again for the team for collaborating on this. It was great to get Vital Topics global, and this was a really global discussion with a UK touch on it. And talk about productivity here together. And a big thank you to the panel, and especially, of course, to Dan Branchett. Thank you. Thanks.